For today's video, I'll be taking a closer look at the different soil options for Walstad Method tanks. I currently run 8 different Walstad Method setups, and 2 of them are coming up to 2 years old now and they're still thriving, showing no signs of nutrient deficiencies in this setup as some sources claim. Hopefully sharing my experiences can help other people set up their own successful Walstad Method aquariums. Before I dive in, I just want to mention that the majority of the information and products I'll be sharing in this video are geared towards Europe and North America. If you are watching from another part of the world, I'd recommend you go on to online communities such as the Walstad Method subreddit that I link in the description and ask for soil advice for your specific country. So I want to start by talking about topsoil here in the UK and Europe because this is what I use and I personally think it's the best method for Walstad Method tanks. It's worked extremely well for myself and several of my friends who use this method in their own aquariums, and it's quite a consistent and affordable option. For my personal setups, I used Westland topsoil, which is marketed for regular garden use. It's available on Amazon as well as B&Q, and it's usually available in smaller local garden centres too. More recently, I have only been adding ½ an inch or just over 1 centimetre as the nutrient layer, but some of my older tanks do have a full inch or around 2.5 centimetres. Westland topsoil is affordable, widely available across the United Kingdom, and it's also stocked in the EU too. But one of my good friends has also used Wix's own brand topsoil without issue, and it's at a similar price point, but with that one you can only buy it from Wix. Moving on to North America, and this is where things start to change. Here in the United Kingdom and in the EU, governments regulate what can be sold as topsoil, covering ingredients, specific ingredient ratios, textures, acidities, and even contaminant levels. That regulation gives us far more consistent product quality across all of the brands that sell topsoil here in Europe. Unfortunately though, over in the United States and Canada there is no federal regulation on what qualifies as topsoil. From what I understand, California and Washington State do have some state level legislation, but even then it's nowhere near as strict as what we have here in Europe, and in all of the other states and all of Canada they can pretty much sell whatever they want. Because of this, different brands of topsoil that are sold over in North America can vary a lot, and those variations may potentially cause problems such as nutrient releases that may result in algae or even potential problems with your livestock and plants. So essentially using topsoil in a Walstad Method tank over in the United States or Canada can be more of a lottery depending on the exact product you choose. I do have one friend over in the United States who keeps quite a few Walstad Method tanks, and he recommends New Plant Life topsoil, but it's not available here in the United Kingdom, so I have no direct experience with it. So jumping back to Europe, and a common option you may see recommended is the Innies No. 3 soil mixture. Now this isn't a single brand, but it's actually a soil recipe, so multiple manufacturers can produce their own product ranges provided they stick closely with the original recipe. Again, I have no direct experience with any products Innies No. 3 mix at all, and it is kind of semi-controversial for Walstad Method tanks due to it potentially causing risks in some specific setups, but personally, I do think that risk is very minimal. The main challenge with the Innies No. 3 is the ongoing transition away from peat-based soils here in the United Kingdom. Historically, this formula did include peat as a core ingredient, and most of the positive reviews that you'll see online for using it in a Walstad Method tank are based on that original version. However, all Innies No. 3 soil formulas sold here in Europe come from members of the Innies Manufacturing Association here in the United Kingdom. With the UK government preparing for a peat ban which has been delayed again and not yet formally law, many of the brands have already started to shift away from that original mixture to peat-free options. This means that there's currently 2 different versions of Innies No. 3 on the market that you can buy right now. There's the original peat-based formula with a proven track record and what a lot of people prefer to use in their Walstad Method tanks, but there's also the newer peat-free formula which has far less experience behind it. The current peat-free formulas use coconut fibre, wood fibre and composted bark, which may potentially cause some issues as well if you choose to use this. So trying your best to sieve that kind of thing out of the mix before you put it in your tank may be a good idea. Personally though, I just think that extra step of having to sieve any soil just pushes regular topsoil, at least the regulated European ones we have here, ahead of the John Innies soil mixes. So moving on, and we get to potting soil, and this is what Diana Walstad recommends in her book, and for this section of the video I'm talking about both North America and Europe at the same time. First, I do want to try and clear up some terminology differences depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on for this one. To my understanding, people in the United States and Canada will only call this type of soil potting soil, and there's no other names for it. But here in the UK, we sometimes call this potting soil, potting mix, or even compost, causing some confusion online. That's because some people who live here in the United Kingdom may recommend compost online for the nutrient layer in other people's Walstad Method tanks, but end up being met with harsh responses from people from North America, thinking that they are recommending decomposing kitchen scraps. Now, there is no malicious intent in these recommendations. As I mentioned, here in the United Kingdom, we will interchangeably use the term compost for both options, and it's very rare that we differentiate between the two, so if you're not British, it can be a little difficult to understand what we actually mean when we use the term compost. To add to the confusion on potting mix even further, there does seem to be a lack of regulation on both sides of the Atlantic for what can be sold in bags with potting soil, potting mix or compost wrote on them. So this can mean that different types of potting soil can have different types of fertiliser, pesticides and various additives in them that may cause problems in an aquarium. So the standard recommendation for anyone looking for potting soil to use in a Walstad Method tank is to try and find something with no added fertilisers, no perlite, no vermiculite, no wetting agents, but this really does narrow down what you can get in this day and age, unfortunately. One of my good friends ended up marrying an Australian girl, and he lives over there with her now, and he loves his aquariums, and in the end he gave up on finding regular topsoil and just ended up going with Aquasoil, because so many products over in Australia contain wetting agents as standard due to their temperature, which can cause problems in aquariums. So even though potting soil is what Diana Walstad recommends in her book, there's a lot of different things to factor in because there's no regulation saying this is what has to be in potting soil, so the consistency can vary widely. I do think this is why so many content creators try and take the time to show you them sieving any potting soil that they use to try and remove wood, rocks, moss and various other things to make sure they are not going into their tank. And as I mentioned earlier, at least here in Europe, due to our regulations on what can be sold as topsoil, this really isn't needed that much because it's pretty much just soil in the bag. If you do live here in the United Kingdom, then one of my good friends does use Miracle-Gro peat-free multi-purpose compost in his Walstad Method tanks without issue. But keep in mind this is a British product, and on this side of the Atlantic we'll use the term compost interchangeably for potting soil and potting mix. So if you do live over in North America, to my understanding it's probably best you avoid any products that have compost in their name and try and make sure it says potting soil or potting mix. I also want to quickly touch on the idea of using soil directly from your garden in your Walstad Method tank, because this is another option that a lot of people have success with. On the surface at least, this is a very affordable option because you just dig up some soil from your garden, sieve it and then add it to your aquarium. But there are some downsides involved with this one as well. For example, I live in an industrial city directly above what was once the deepest coal mine in the world when it was opened, which is also directly on the riverbanks of what used to be the largest shipbuilding city on the planet, so there's a lot of contamination. So there's just no way that I'd personally risk any of the soil from my garden or surrounding area in one of my aquariums. But on the other hand of that, a good friend of mine who lives down in rural Yorkshire uses soil from his garden in all of his aquariums and shrimp jars and has no issues, and his plants are thriving. But another friend who lives up in rural Scotland tried the same thing with soil from his garden, and he's ended up having some type of fungus outbreak and he's had to start the tank over from scratch. So while using soil from your garden can work, it is a bit of a gamble as well, and personally I just think it's safer to go with a commercial option if you can find a suitable one in your area. Even with the rise in prices, a 20-litre bag of topsoil here in the United Kingdom is usually between £5 and £10 depending on where you buy it, and that's a lot of soil. You can use that in a lot of different tanks unless you're building a massive one. I just think it's a safer option overall. Finally, I want to touch on using Aquasoil in your setup. Technically, this will move the setup out of what would be considered as a true Walstad Method tank, but the more content that I make about filterless aquariums, the more I notice that most people in the hobby honestly don't mind. For a lot of people, it does seem that the main focus isn't necessarily on keeping their costs as low as possible and using capped dirt in their aquariums. It is more on having peace of mind and making sure that their filterless tank will run as smoothly as possible. If you're comfortable with the higher costs of Aquasoil, then it can work perfectly well in a filterless aquarium. For example, my new shrimp bowl runs on Fluval Stratum Aquasoil just because I wanted to keep this specific setup as easy as possible. Using any Aquasoil product can help take away the worry of choosing the wrong soil product in your tank and then having problems with your tank later on. It also removes the need for a capping layer of gravel or sand on top of your soil, which is another thing a lot of people worry about with Walstad Method tanks. On top of that, it's also far easier to specifically research aquasoils for use in aquariums because that is their intended use, and if you Google reviews for different types of topsoil, they're usually for gardening or potted plants in your house and things like that rather than in aquariums. So while Aquasoil is far more expensive than soil or dirt, a lot of people do seem to be fine with that trade-off and have that peace of mind that it's a lot easier and a lot more consistent to use. But just like topsoil and potting soil, Aquasoil can also release ammonia into your tank after the initial setup for a couple of weeks, so keep this in mind. Personally, I wouldn't recommend you instantly stock the tank. You will probably need to do some water changes after the initial setup to keep the ammonia levels in check. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching, I hope it's been helpful and good luck with your Walstad Method tanks.